The vineyard glowed in late afternoon, rows of grapes fading into the distance, the air sweet with roses and fresh wood. I smoothed my dress and stood in the registration line, trying to steady my breath. People around me bubbled with excitement, voices rising like champagne. The woman at the check-in table barely looked at me. She reached into a cardboard box, pulled out a small square badge with a bent corner, and set it down without a word. In plain black letters, it said, "Limited guest. No gold trim, no ribbon, nothing fancy. Just cheap laminate and a strip of tape. You'd see on a factory tour." I stared at it, waiting for her to notice a mistake. She'd already turned to the next guest. The woman behind me smiled as she received her gold-edged lanyard, her name written in sweeping script. She slipped it over her neck like a necklace. I picked up my badge. The paper was already curling in the heat. I thought about asking why. A heavy hand clapped my shoulder before I could speak. Cassian stood there, his suit a little tight around the middle, grinning like a kid who'd gotten away with something. "Guess they finally figured you out," he said, loud enough for the couple beside us to hear. They smirked, not at him, but at me. My cheeks burned. I had no words. I pinned the flimsy square to my dress. It felt like a label, a brand. Cassian walked away chuckling, and I forced myself toward the music, where the celebration waited, without me. I stepped to the side and leaned against the wall, while laughter and clinking glasses rose and fell in waves. My fingers found the badge again, thin paper softening under my touch, then slid into my purse and brushed an envelope I'd carried for weeks. Inside was a check for $100,000. I had written it slowly, my pen pressing hard, each number heavy with the hours behind it. Overnights at the hospital, holidays spent on the floor instead of at home, trips I didn't take, shoes I wore down to, threads. It wasn't just money. It was years of my life turned into numbers. When I first sealed it, I imagined handing it to my sister Isolde with pride, her eyes bright when she understood what I believed she could build. I thought it might be a bridge, a way back to the closeness we used to have. But now, with a limited guest sticker pressed into my dress like a warning, the envelope felt less like love and more like a payment to stay quiet. I closed my eyes and remembered nights I came home after 18 hours, peeling off scrubs that smelled like antiseptic, whispering to myself that the sacrifice would be worth it, that I would be right next to my sister when she stepped into her future. Worth it to who? To Isolde, who hadn't even looked my way when I walked in? To Cassian, whose laugh still rang in my ears? The envelope grew heavier in my purse, like it knew the answer. I pushed it deeper, tightened my grip on the strap, and stepped farther into the reception, determined to see where this night would really lead. The edge of the envelope pulled me back to the morning that split our lives in two. I was 19 when the call came. Our father's truck had been hit head-on by a driver who didn't stop after last call. Overnight, our small house fell silent, and suddenly, everything sat on my shoulders. I can still see the kitchen. Isolde curled in a chair, knees to her chest. Cassian pacing hard, fists clenched, asking questions no one could answer. I said I'd take night shifts at the diner until I found something steadier. I promised Isolde she could stay at her school and keep her world intact, even if mine had to bend. It started small. I gave her my room so she could study and slept on a cot in the living room. When she wanted braces, I signed up for hospital overtime, pushing carts until my shoes split. Holidays became shifts. When she started applying to colleges, I added a second job on weekends, filling the gaps scholarships didn't cover. Cassian never forgave me for stepping in. He sneered when bills were paid, called me a martyr. "You like being the hero?" He'd spit, as if I'd picked a crown instead of a weight. He never offered to carry anything. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that Isolde had what she needed. I convinced myself my life could wait until hers was set. Now, in a celebration where I barely counted, I had to ask whether I'd built a foundation for her or dug a hole under myself I could never climb out of. I met Varity Aldwin months before. The wedding, at a cafe that smelled like citrus and clean linen. I'd suggested the diner near my place, where the coffee was always hot and the staff knew my name. Isolde wanted somewhere more fitting. When I arrived, Varity was already seated, posture perfect, her handbag on the chair beside her like a guest. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that had already judged me. After our drinks were set down, she leaned in, voice smooth. "It's remarkable how you helped cover the deposit for the banquet hall. So generous, especially on a nurse's salary." Sweet words, sharp edge. I gave her a soft laugh, the kind I'd use to dull the sting of worse. I glanced at Isolde. Her lips tightened, then eased into a faint smile. No defense, no subject change. She watched Varity with something like admiration, maybe hunger. As the months passed, I watched little changes stack up. Isolde's voice took on Verity's careful cadence, clipped, precise. Her gestures got small and practiced. On the phone, she was brisk, efficient. Kindness felt rationed. I told myself it was wedding stress. But each time Varity walked into a room, Isolde's spine straightened. Her laugh grew quiet, like she was auditioning. Meanwhile, I kept paying what needed paying, kept saying yes when asked to move money. I told myself love was patience. I ignored the knot in my stomach to avoid a truth I wasn't ready to face. That truth pressed harder now. The weeks before the wedding had been full of little warnings I told myself were accidents. The rehearsal schedule arrived without my name among the speakers. I asked if I should prepare a toast, just a few words about family. Isolde hesitated just long enough for me to understand. "We thought we'd keep it short. Too many voices. Gets messy." Her tone was polished, rehearsed, almost exactly like Verity's. At the ceremony, I sat in the third row, tucked behind distant cousins and family friends. I told myself it didn't matter, that seeing her walk down the aisle was what mattered. But watching from that far, I felt like a visitor, not family. Our calls changed too. We used to share small secrets, her favorite books, doubts about her career, the silly jokes only sisters understood. In the months before the wedding, our words shrank into lists. Payments due, deadlines coming, which florist confirmed. Her thanks felt like duty, not affection. Every time I hung up, I told myself warmth would return after the vows, after the planning faded. I told myself she would look for me in the crowd, call me to her, thank me not as the helper who kept the gears turning, but as her sister. That belief was a thin thread I held, even as it frayed. Now, standing at the edge of the room with the badge pressed flat against my chest, I saw it. The pattern hadn't broken. It had finished. The thread was gone. I wasn't holding anything anymore. The reception glowed with fairy lights looped across beams and wrapped around pillars. Guests flowed in clusters, badges catching the light. I drifted to the seating chart on a gilded easel. Names lined up in neat rows. Family with family, friends with friends, the groom's relatives filling the first lines. I searched down and back up, slower, not trusting my eyes. My name wasn't there. A waiter moved past with champagne. He didn't offer me a glass. Another walked by with salmon on porcelain. No glance. The limited guest badge might as well have turned me invisible. I slipped to the back of the room and stood behind a column wrapped in white fabric. From there, I could see the head table. Isolde sat glowing, lace catching the light. She leaned into her new husband, smiling wide while cameras popped. Glasses lifted. Laughter rose. Across the room, Cassian found me. He raised his glass in a mocking salute, his grin spreading slow, satisfied, as if my missing name was a private joke turned public. I dropped my gaze, refusing to give him the win of seeing me break. The cheap paper dug into my skin. I stayed behind the column and let the applause wash over me like a tide I was never meant to enter. Almost without deciding, I turned toward the gift table. The envelope in my purse suddenly felt like a stone calling me forward. The gift table stood near the entrance, dressed in white linen and crowded with glossy bags and satin bows. Gilded boxes held stacks of cards, some embossed, some with careful script. I scanned until I found mine. Plain white, no ribbon, my handwriting sharp and clear. No one had touched it. I stood over it, my fingers hovering, and thought of the nights I'd worked doubles, the mornings I'd limped home and told myself this would be worth it. I thought of the vacations I skipped, the comforts I didn't buy, so the number could climb. $100,000. Years of sacrifice folded into a single envelope. My hand closed before I could second guess. The paper was cool and fragile under my palm. I slipped it into my purse. The zipper's teeth closed like a lock. A hush lifted behind me. Not loud, but real. Eyes turned. A murmur moved through the room, soft at first, sharper as it spread. No one spoke to me. I straightened, lifted my bag higher on my shoulder, and walked toward the door. My heart pounded, but my steps stayed steady. The music swelled as if to drown the sound of me leaving. Then a voice cut through everything, sharp, urgent, familiar. My name. Once, then again, louder. Gravel crunched under my heels as I followed the path to the parking lot. Cool air wrapped around me like a cloak. Behind me, the music faded, but my name carried, thin and panicked. Isolde. I kept walking, the envelope secure, my fingers tight around the strap like it tied me to my choice. Another call rang out, closer now, and fabric scraped stone. I looked back for half a second. There she was, gown lifted, train dragging, face pale under the vineyard lights. For a heartbeat, something in me reached for her. The girl who used to hold my sleeve after school, the teenager who cried into my lap after her heart broke. She looked just like that now, afraid and reaching. I turned away before it could root in me. I moved faster, years pushing me forward instead of back. The parking lot glinted under dim lamps. My keys rattled. My hand shook only a little as I slid the metal into the lock. "Please," she shouted, her voice breaking. I paused for a single breath. It cut through me like glass. Then I opened the door, slid in, and shut it. The outside went quiet. Her voice turned to an echo. The engine hummed steady as I shifted to reverse. In the rear view, she stood alone in white at the edge of the lot, hands hanging at her sides. I looked ahead, pressed the gas, and followed the winding road out. The lights and music fell away until nothing was left but dark and my own breath. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had softened to a washed-out blue, the kind you see after storms even when no rain fell. I sat in the car a long time. The envelope rested on the seat beside me like a witness. My phone buzzed and buzzed, names lighting the screen I couldn't face. I powered it off, carried the quiet inside, and set it down in the rooms like new. Furniture. I brewed tea I didn't drink, sat at the table, and stared at the pale square of light from the lamp. The quiet was heavy, but it was mine. I went to bed without answering anyone. The next afternoon, my friend Marin called. She sometimes worked weddings as a planner's assistant. Her voice was careful. "I thought you should know," she said. Then the truth I'd been holding together came apart. I had been listed at the head table beside Isolde on the original chart, marked in green ink. 4 days before the wedding, Varity requested changes. My name moved down to what she called overflow. The final page showed Isolde's check. Mark, her consent. I thanked Marin and hung up. My hands shook. The betrayal didn't burn hot. It settled cold and heavy. It wasn't just Varity. Isolde had seen it, agreed, and let it happen. I sat in the stillness with the sealed envelope beside me and understood the silence between us had grown into a distance I couldn't cross. On the 4th day, my phone rang again. I nearly let it go to voicemail. The name on the screen stopped. Me. Isolde's voice came through frayed and tired. They couldn't book the honeymoon without my check. The deposit was due tomorrow. I stayed quiet and let the silence breathe. She rushed to fill it. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Varity said the seating was tight. I thought it didn't matter where you sat. Please, I need you." My throat closed, but my voice came out calm. "If I ever give again, it won't be a gift. It will be on my terms, in writing, clear, with conditions, not one-sided anymore." She drew in a soft breath and then a small sob. I let it sit. Then I ended the call. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It belonged to me. That evening, I pulled on gloves and carried a small box of bulbs to the garden by the fence. The soil was loose from the last rain. I knelt and pressed deep purple tulips into the earth, the kind she used to call princess flowers. This time I planted them for me, for the part of me that waited too long to be seen. Dirt cooled my fingers, steadying me. I patted the ground back into place. The garden held me. The silence softened, no longer a wound, a promise.